Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of Ruby Rogues. So I'm going to let y'all know, since this is the second Ruby Rogues episode in a row that is just me, let y'all know kind of what's been going on. So and then I'm going to talk a bit about Minaswan and the community and things like that, because I'm seeing a lot of things that are concerning me there. Let me jump in and talk a little bit first about just where things are. So I wound up getting a full-time working at Prize Picks in March, and that has taken up a lot of time, and so I've put a lot of effort in there, and between that and all the stuff going on with my kids and school and all that stuff, I haven't been as good about scheduling guests to come on the show. And Valentino got a new job as well. He's not at Dr. anymore. And so anyway, it's just, there's been a lot going on. And so we haven't been as diligent about recording, but I want to get back into this. I actually intend, I talked about this on another show, just out Ruby tip of the day, do some stuff about AI in Ruby. And so keep an eye out for that stuff. But yeah, so there will be an episode every week, even if it's just me for the foreseeable future. But I have started inviting guests, and so we're going to see if we can get some of the folks on who are talking about interesting stuff or doing interesting stuff in the Ruby community. In the meantime, I wanted to talk today a little bit about Minaswan. So if you're newer to the Ruby community or haven't heard the term before, Minaswan stands for Mats is nice, and so we are nice. And when I joined the Ruby community, that was kind of a mantra that a lot of people cited as one of the things they really loved about the Ruby community, was that they would join the community and people would embrace them and invite them to be part of things and would be excited to have them around and would help them out and things like that. And over the years, it feels like some people have continued to embrace that, and we've also had other elements of the community that have, let's just put it in a friendly way and say they haven't. Some of this is down to kind of the political climate that we find ourselves in, right? So some people just don't want to associate with people on the other side of the political aisle, at least here in the U.S. I have tried to keep my politics out of the shows for the most part. I mean, it's cropped up. I got canceled on Twitter for it in 2019. But for the most part, you're not listening to hear what I think about social issues. You're not here to hear what I have to say about Utah or U.S. politicians, right? You're not here to get my take on some of these other issues, right? You're here because we all love Ruby, and we all want to level up with Ruby. We all want to learn to write code better. We all want to, remain employed. I'm trying to think, what other things, write code that we love, build businesses, all of that stuff, right? And so if I'm talking about that stuff and I'm providing you with things that help you with those areas, then I feel like that's, that's the powerful thing. That's where the payoff is. But if I'm out there and I'm saying, well, I don't want to talk to so-and-so because they don't align with me politically, then that's not in the spirit of Minaswan. But it's also, well, what does that have to do with you and I loving Ruby and having that in common? And so let's just speak about this for a minute, because I want to talk about a few areas where I'm seeing this crop up. One of them is there's a fairly large Ruby Discord out there that I've seen them ban or otherwise pile on people because of their stances that they've taken on various things. And usually it's not something that has to do with the Ruby community, right? I mean, so let's back up for a minute, right? So last week I talked about the situation with Ruby gems and bundler and things like that, which, by the way, apparently the Ruby gems and bundler repos have moved over to the Ruby organization instead of Ruby Central, right? So Ruby core team's going to manage those, which is awesome, right? Because it kind of takes a lot of this out of the hands of people that some of the community doesn't trust anymore. And the other thing is that they're kind of more core to the Ruby core than they are to the Ruby setup. Ruby Central can hopefully just continue to maintain rubygems.org and we can tamp down some of the concerns there, right? So then they can just be good stewards of that. They can keep it running, and everybody can be happy and move along, right? But yeah, so we've seen a lot of anger and frustration and concern, right? And to my thinking, right, a lot of that is appropriate to our community, because it's like, hey, we saw Andre log onto the servers when he shouldn't have, right? And so we can express concern about that, right? Now, I'm not going after him for anything that has to do with anything outside of the Ruby community, because that's not really relevant to what we're talking about. But I can express concern over whether or not I feel like I can trust the guy based on his behavior, right? Um, Look at some of the other things that are going on out there and recognize that, if somebody's not being a good steward of the gem that they write, right? And so that it'll open up security vulnerability, or, there's a team out there that maintains a framework or something that you use, right? And you find that they're having 0 days, and then they're not taking, right? So all of those things I feel like are appropriate for us to call out and say, hey, look, right? You're not being a responsible actor with the community as far as ideas and issues and practice go. The community has a reasonable expectation that you will uphold, right? But again, a lot of that really just boils down to the code and things like that. Now, if you get into personal conduct, I'm not opposed to saying, hey, look, Minaswan, for example, we're going to treat each other with respect. We're going to be kind to each other. We're going to help each other where we can, right? And having those be values that we appropriately act within the community, right? And so, yeah, I see code conduct, right, where it says, hey, don't treat people poorly because of their sexual orientation or this or that or the other, right? And I would like to add political leanings to that, right? So we don't discriminate people. We don't bully people. We don't mistreat people. We don't ban people because they think differently from us or because they behave differently from us. Now, if you're coming into my community and you're being a total jerk off, right? You're just mistreating people, and that does maybe reflect some value that you hold, then yeah, that's behavior that I don't have to tolerate, and I can say, no, you're out, right? But the reality is then I have that code of conduct to fall back on and say, you should have known that if you started mistreating people, I was going to kick you out. I want to call out one thing in particular. So I was at Rocky Mountain Ruby Conference a few weeks ago, and there were a couple of talks where they talked about their communities. And I'm going, yeah, and then I love that, right? I love that, hey, we've got this library or this, one of them was Hanami and Dry RB, right? And they do cool stuff, interesting work. But the guy up there said, yeah, and we put together this community. And then he basically said, and I'm going to use some politically charged language here. Again, I see it from both sides, and so I'll call it out from the other side in a minute. But, they basically said, no, Nazis, transphobes, or fascists, right, in the channel. And I was sitting there thinking to myself, well, how does somebody know if they meet your definition of a Nazi, transphobe, or fascist, right? On the other side, a lot of times we hear snowflakes or libtards or, things like that. And again, not helpful, right? And again, it's down to, hey, what kind of people do we want? And for me, it has a whole lot more to do with your behavior in the community, right? So, just to go back to the Nazi and transphobe and fascist for a minute, those terms, right? So what does define a Nazi? Like, how do you determine if somebody who joins your community meets that definition and is not welcome, right? As I see some people, and it seems like they would categorize that as maybe people who voted for Donald Trump, or people who have conservative political leanings or who support Republican candidates in any way. But what I find is that there are a lot of people out there that I talk to that Donald Trump kind of drives them nuts, but they voted for the guy because they thought that the economics would be better. Or maybe they don't buy into some of the premises or messages where people are trying to make him out to be, hateful or this or that or the other, right? And they're like, well, no, I see him doing the things that you're calling out as evil for reasons that I think are reasonable. And so to me, the concern over the idea of calling somebody out as a Nazi is that what you're saying is that fundamentally they want to harm people of a specific race or religion, right? Or that, they're looking to some kind of purity with the Aryan purity thing that the Nazis did or something like that. And it's got this historical context. And so it doesn't have a good definition. And if you're concerned with, okay, well, these people have some issue with some other group of people, well, then just call that out in your code of conduct. And instead of saying Nazi, say, look, we don't mistreat people based on race. We don't mistreat people based on religion, right? It's the same thing with transphobes, right? So the term, it's a little more directed because if you're mistreating people because they're transgender, right? I don't think anybody gets behind that, or at least no reasonable people do, right? I think, again, going back to Minaswan, we want people to feel welcome. But, just to put kind of a finer point on it, right? I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. A lot of people call us Mormons, right? And the church specifically teaches that transgender surgeries and transgender stuff is just, it's not okay. It's not in line with what God teaches us, right? Now, the church is also pretty explicit about, hey, look, we're kind of people who don't believe what we believe, and we're kind of people who, don't act in line with our beliefs, right? Another one of our beliefs is that we don't drink alcohol or coffee or tea. And, again, I don't go and, shun people because they drink alcohol, right? Just like I don't go and shun people who are transgender. A couple of the shows on this network, including Ruby Rogues, have had transgender hosts. And, they were great hosts. They talked about stuff. They knew their stuff. They were, knowledgeable and friendly and helpful. And that's what I wanted in a host. And so I had them around, right? Now, am I going to sign off on their lifestyle and say that that's the right way to live? No, right? Because I don't believe it. But am I going to mistreat them? No. Why? Because they obviously have a different value system than I do. And so they're going to make those decisions based on whatever it is that they believe. And, and so we can have discussions about what we believe is fundamental truth without beating each other up verbally and without mistreating people, and still walk away as friends. And that's a lot of what's in the spirit of Minaswan. But, if somebody doesn't want to talk about it, I'm not going to force them to talk about it. I don't have to, right? I have plenty of stuff going on in my life to where I don't need to worry about what they're doing, right? And, if it's my kids or somebody else that I have that kind of a relationship with, then I can have that conversation with them, but I have that kind of relationship with them too. And so I get really frustrated with this. The other one is fascist, right? And again, it's like, I think it's kind of become this code for authoritarian, or, somebody who kind of moves a little bit beyond what has been the norm and does things that makes people uncomfortable. And what I want to push on there is, I would be much more comfortable if we're calling out the behaviors that we don't want to see, right? And so it's like, again, you're not going to do these kinds of things. You're not going to attack these kinds of people, at least within our community, right? Now, if you're going out and supporting other political movements, or you're speaking in public or things like that, then, do whatever you want. But within the community, if you're going to be mistreating these people, then you're not welcome, right? And I would rather make that distinction than go off into this other stuff, right? And it's the same thing for going the other way, right? So, I mean, I'll confess that I'm very politically and socially conservative, right? So, and I talk to people that kind of on my side of the aisle quite a bit because I'm involved in politics here in Utah. And some of them make out that, well, if these, liberal people weren't such morons, they would understand how this stuff works. And I look at them and I go, well, look, the thing is that I know a lot of liberal people who are really, really intelligent people, right? And they care deeply about other people. And they're looking for solutions to these places where they see people suffer. And so I can't just write them off as idiots, right? Because I know that they're not. I know that they're intelligent people. I know that they have, some values that I share, right? Because I don't want to see people suffer either. And so for me, I have to look at it and go, okay, well, then what are the fundamental things that are different between me and them and what we believe, right? What do I believe that they don't, or what do they believe that I don't, that fundamentally shifts the argument for them, right? Placing more weight on than I am. What things are they hearing that I'm not hearing? What things am I hearing that they're not hearing? Right. And if we can get down to that, then it starts to make sense. And I can see the humanity in the other people, and B, understand that, you know what, they may vote different from me and may vote for things that I think are scary. Right. It's like, hey, look, if we go all the way down that road, talk about your totalitarianism or authoritarianism, I think we get way down that road and it gets freaky, scary. But I can see where they're coming from with that stuff, and then we can have a conversation about it. And I don't have to hate them for doing things that, enable some of these movements that I honestly think are evil. Because at the end of the day, yeah, there may be somebody up the chain that's giving them bad information on purpose to gain power, or maybe the people up the chain believe it too, right? I think there are both kinds out there. I think there are both kinds on both sides, or all sides, I guess, because sometimes it's not a two-sided thing. But at the end of the day, right, we need to recognize that there are reasons why people behave the way that they do. And so if you come back to this, well, Nazis, because Trump, right? And the thing is I know, like I said before, I know a lot of people who voted Trump for a lot of reasons, and a lot of those reasons have nothing to do with hating a particular group. They just had specific concerns about the way the country was going and how that affected their lives, and so they voted that way. And a lot of people are centrist enough to where in the next election they may vote the other way, and that's all understandable. But demonizing people as Nazis is just not helpful, especially when you're not getting into the nitty gritty of, okay, the things that I specifically think are evil, and we're not going to tolerate those in our community. I want to get into another one, and I'm sure I'm stepping it with some people here, and that's David, DHH. So David says a lot of stuff. I could say that about a number of people, public people. But he says a lot of stuff. And to be honest, a lot of the things that he says, I agree with. Maybe I won't go as far as he does on some, or, maybe I have a little bit more nuanced view than he does. In a lot of cases, I think he's diagnosing a lot of the in the world at large. And he does write and out on a lot of issues in the world at large. Now, I want step back, because when I see him at like Ruby Rails World and other Ruby, he expresses a strong worldview, but it's almost always within the realm of the Ruby community and what's going on with Ruby or Rails. And so, if you want to go watch a Rails World keynote, more power to you, right? Don't like his worldview on other stuff, then don't go read his blog. And I don't know, maybe I don't have a problem separating things that way, and maybe other folks do, but honestly, it's just, I get so worried sometimes that we get so wrapped up in this, and there are folks that tried to kind of stage this boycott of anything involving DHH because of his stances on things. And again, I think we have all been richly benefited by having things like Ruby on Rails and the work that he's done out there in the world. And I think we should all support him when he does the right thing with Ruby and Rails. And then if you want to go and fight the other political battles on the other fronts where you don't agree with him, that's fine. But I don't understand the point of shunning somebody like DHH based on his wider worldview, when most of the time when he's working within the technology industry, he's either calling out problems that specifically exist there, or he's, otherwise, he's kind of stayed in his lane. And then when he steps out into the wider world of, hey, there are these other concerns or political movements or things like that, it doesn't have to bleed back into the technology arena. And so, again, I want to talk about just how we maintain that idea of accepting and understanding other people instead of shunning them because they hold some kind of different view from what we care about, what we think about. So when it comes right down to it, what I'd like to see, if anything, is that we have more conversations, that we reach out to more people, that we open our minds and open our hearts to people and just say, okay, look, you clearly believe something different from me. Let's talk about why that is, right? You clearly value different things from me, or at least value some things more strongly than I do. Let's talk about why that is. Why do you do the things you do? Why do I do the things I do? And if we can break things down to that point and then have the conversations, I'm not saying that we come to agree. That isn't necessarily, where I think we necessarily end up. I have plenty of friends where we have these conversations and we walk away still friends and still disagreeing on stuff, right? But I want the community to be open to people, and I want people to feel like they can come and they can express themselves in ways that are beneficial to the community. And sure, if somebody comes in and they start spouting off about, some political thing here or there that has nothing to do with the community, I also don't have a problem with people saying, hey, look, we understand that people strongly disagree in these areas. And so that belongs in a different Discord channel, or that belongs in a different forum, or that belongs in a, and so you can go and have those arguments somewhere else. But here we're going to talk about stuff that is relevant and matters to the Ruby and Ruby on Rails communities. And we can kind of open that up. So a few things that I've seen that are encouraging to me. So one of them is Greg Molnar opened up another Ruby Discord, and I'll put the link in the show notes. But he's been pretty explicit that he's taking all comers, and they're not going to ban people for having points of view, which I think is awesome. Right. And so I think if you show up and you start picking on people or bullying people or causing problems, then he'll probably throw you out, and he probably has every reason to do that. But if you come in and it turns out that you have pretty strong opinions on this social issue or that political issue, as long as you're not browbeating people with it, you're probably fine in there, which is great. And so then we can talk about, hey, I love Ruby and you love Ruby, right? I love working in Ruby on Rails, and so do you. I think these features of PostgreSQL are awesome. I've been deploying with Kamal. Oh, well, I've been deploying on Kubernetes. Oh, okay. Well, what are the benefits? What are the frustrations? What are you doing different from me? How can I benefit? Oh, you've got this scaling issue. Oh, well, I might be able to help you, right? And I feel like if we do those kinds of things and we have those kind of communities, right, then that's the kind of thing that can bring us together, right? And we see this in other communities, right? I mean, I go to church every week. I know everybody there doesn't agree with me on everything, right? Even within the church and church doctrine, I know some people have some different ideas from me, right? I think the fundamental core things we agree on, right? Because those are kind of foundational to the faith. But, there are other ideas out there and things that people consider and stuff like that they may come to a different conclusion than I do, right? But they're still welcome. I'm still welcome, right? I may have a different political leaning than some of the other folks at church. I'm still welcome, and they're still welcome, right? And again, maybe we don't talk about it, or maybe we talk in general principle terms, or maybe when we walk outside of the door of the church, I go to lunch with you and we have a deeper conversation about it. But at the end of the day, that's what we're really looking at, is then I can still love you for who you are. You can still love me for who I am. I can accept you for what you believe and why you're different. And you can accept me for what I believe and why I'm different. And we don't have to get into this ticky-tack, tit for tat, because, you're this and I'm that, right? Let's just go and help everybody succeed as a part of our community. And let's go create that kind of place where people can come and say, oh, wow, this is a great place to be, right? And so kind of beyond the community things like conferences and Discord channels and podcasts and things like that, where, we kind of have these open conversations about things. Again, I'd love to see us be doing more things like, you've got Go Rails or Drifting Ruby or some of the things that I'm working on putting together, right? You've got video courses, you've got YouTube channels, you've got all of these places where people can come and level up and feel like, hey, look, we want you here. And so we built these resources so that you can come and succeed. We built these resources so that you can come and find acceptance and family in the communities that we've created, right? I can't tell you how many of my friends over the years have come out of this community. And it's because we all got together and we celebrated the things that we had in common and that we loved, that they loved too, right? And so at the end of the day, that's really what I'm pushing for, is I'm just pushing for, hey, look. So next time you see somebody and you kind of have that reaction of, oh, they might be, politically non-desirable. They're a privileged person or this or that, right? Instead, look at them and go, how can I help them? And then the next person you see, how can I help them too? And the next person, right? How can I help them? And then maybe when you ask for help, right? Then maybe it's my turn. How can I help you? Right? And then you pass that along, right? I had a conversation with somebody yesterday that I work with, because they have, they call them virtual coffee, but basically, we just get on a call for a half hour and we just chat. Right. And it's for me to get to know my coworkers and them to get to know me. And it tries to pair you up with people who are not on your team that you don't interact with on a regular basis. And, so we were chatting and, I had just gotten done recording JavaScript Jabber. And he's like, oh, well, what podcast do you record? And I was like, JavaScript Jabber. And he's like, oh, I listened to that. You're him. Right. But then he proceeded to tell me that he had, when he was learning to program, that he had gotten in and that he had listened to us on a regular basis to learn and level up. And, that some of the things that we had talked about on the show were things that helped him out. And those are the kinds of things, right? If we're going to focus on anything, instead of being focused on, is this person an undesirable? Is this person not politically aligned with me? Is this person, supporting causes that I find hateful? Instead, it's, is this person somebody that I can help? Is this person somebody that I can make a difference with? Is this a person somebody that I can, that I can really, bring into the community and help them thrive, and help them thrive in a way that then they in turn will help others thrive. And if I can do those kinds of things and I can have those kinds of relationships with people, then if it does come down to some of these other things and we want to discuss what we see as true and what we understand to be right and things like that, then those conversations are a whole lot easier, because then it's, okay, well, I know that you're a good person because we've had all these interactions. And I know that you care about a lot of these things that I care about because we've had a lot of these interactions and you've shown it through your actions. So now we've got this cognitive dissonance between what you believe and what I believe, but we can talk about it, right? Oh, okay, I understand why you think the way you think. I understand why you believe the way you believe. Here are some things that here's the way I see it. Oh, okay, I hadn't thought about that way before. And so then I go and I think about it and decide, if there's some truth in what you're telling me, and I decide if that's, how deeply to consider that. But if we're coming at each other and going, you're a Nazi, or you're a fascist, or you're a transphobe, or you're a moron, or you're an idiot, or you're a communist, or you're a this or a that, the labels just don't help, right? Because at the end of the day, then I'm going to shut off. I'm going to go, well, I don't need to listen to you. You're attacking me. But if we're friends and we can build those relationships and understand each other, then I think we begin to bring people around and understand, oh, okay. This is why we see the world differently. And then maybe too, I can have a conversation with you and basically say, hey, well, so we kind of agree on this stuff. Does this thing happening right now concern you? Right. And then we can talk about it. Oh yeah. I'm concerned. I think this is the reason why this is happening and not that, but I am concerned that it could lead to this other thing, just as you're saying. And then we have that back and forth and we have that understanding, but we've got to be creating this community where we can bring people in and accept people where they're at. And then from there, we can build into some of these other things and some of these other ideas. So, anyway, that's mostly what I wanted to talk about today. So I am going to wrap up the show. What I'm going to get into at this point is the picks. And so I've got a couple of picks. My first pick, I always do a board game. I'm sorry, this was a little bit heavy, this episode, but I just, I wanted to make sure I cover it. I guess I should also talk about that probably about half of the people that I've had as hosts on the shows, like I don't even know what their religious or political or any other leanings are, because I just haven't thought it was that critical to know. And I've also gotten crap for platforming people who hold some of the opinions that are less palatable to people. And again, I just, I've never understood what the problem is. If they've got a different idea, then let's talk about it. Anyway, so picks. So my first pick is, it's a variation on Pandemic. And it's called Lord of the Rings, Fate of the Fellowship. And what it is you see, you've got this big game board, and in Pandemic, you're usually fighting a disease strain, right? And so you're collecting cards so that you can cure a disease. In Fate of the Fellowship, you're doing some of that, but instead of a disease, it's the armies of Sauron and the other bad guys, I guess, the orcs and stuff like that. So you have good armies, right? So you've got the Rohirrim, elves, and I think there was another group I can't remember, but anyway, so you're moving armies around the board and taking territories and things like that. And you're also trying to get Frodo to Mount Doom to destroy the ring, but before you do that, you have to do other things, right? So you have to take Isengard over, right, and turn it into a haven. You've got to there was something about a battle. We didn't actually win, and so we didn't get them all done. But anyway, there are 3 missions you have to complete before Frodo can destroy the ring. And then Frodo has to be in Mount Doom, and you have to have, I think, 5 ring cards in order to win. And so you have different characters that you move around the board. And I have to say, the game is actually very visually stunning, right? You've got the tower with the Eye of Sauron on it, and you roll the dice through it, which is cool. It has 9 Nazgul, and they're fairly large pieces that you move around the board, and they're awesome. Most of the character pieces are pretty awesome. The armies are just little wood cutouts, right? So they're not as exciting. But you move along the map, and the armies move across the map in different prescribed ways. based on the cards you flip to, quote, infect the map. And anyway, it was really, really fun. We lost twice. We lost the first time within like a turn and a half. Just bad luck. And then the second time we played for a while and lost. I kind of want to play again just to see if we can make it work. We'll be teaching the game at TIMCon in Provo, Utah, on November 7th and 8th. So if you're in Utah, come out. I'll be spending some of the time at the Hot Games table teaching the games. But anyway, it's very fun. Board Game Geek weights it at 2.99 on Amazon. It is not currently available. It is sold out. But yeah, it's a cool game, very cool game. And my wife is a big Pandemic fan, and so I think we own all of the Pandemics except maybe that one. And there might have been another one that's come out since then, because a lot of games use the Pandemic engine and then build on it from there. So anyway, so I'm going to pick that. I guess the other thing that I'll just put out there is I am starting a new podcast about building a SaaS. I'm working on a software as a service that will host podcast networks. And specifically, I want to get more into media. And, it will have all the podcast features, but, kind of branch into the other, videos and training and coaching and masterminds and, things like that. And so all the things that I've talked about doing with top end devs and say Ruby and JavaScript, where it's, hey, you've got the tip of the day videos, you've got a weekly, more in-depth video on the technology, you've got weekly, group coaching calls that are anywhere from, hey, here's an expert I know that came in to talk about a thing, to, maybe asking questions or getting to know each other, or book clubs or things like that, doing the summits. I want to do more of those over the coming years, putting out other video content. I'm also imagining this for some like a local media channel where it's, like in Utah, right? So it's, hey, here's the stuff that's happening in Utah as far as news goes. Here's, stuff that's happening, in the legislature and how that affects us. Because a lot of that stuff, especially when you get more and more local, is less and less partisan, right? And so it's, hey, look, like Utah's a super majority Republican state, right? And so the things that the Republicans tend to get right, sometimes they still make poor decisions, right? And you see this in super majority Democrat states too, right? Where there's not really a check on one of the parties. And so they tend to do what they want. And so a lot of times there's not somebody really pushing back and saying, hey, what you're trying to do makes sense, but the way you're doing it has problems. And so, just kind of pushing down to that and saying, hey, here's how we protect our freedoms. Here's how we protect our ability to live and things like that. And so, just getting into some of the more local issues, right? Traffic. I'm trying to think, we have other resource issues here in Utah with water and stuff like that. And so, just providing kind of an outlet for that stuff where maybe you don't have the money to go and set up a traditional or proper TV channel, right? You can still have the Utah Channel app on your Apple TV or Fire Stick or Roku, and you can get all the shows and watch all the things just like you do on Netflix. Well, anyway, that's the SaaS I'm building, and so I'm working on putting together a show called Single Player SaaS, and it's mostly going to be focused on single developers or small teams that are building out SaaS products. And so I'm going to kind of chronicle my journey. But the other thing is that I'm also going to be bringing on experts. For example, I finished listening to this book on Audible. It's called Email Marketing Demystified. I'm almost through it. I'm about halfway through it. I don't know. You can see it there. And so, because I like to read the physical book, but I listen to a lot more books than I physically read. And so if I like the book, then I'll buy it and I'll actually read it. And then sometimes I pick up other books. So like I've got Software as a Science is the book right there behind my head. I don't think there's an audio book. I just got it because it looked like it was in line with what I wanted. So I'm going to bring some of those authors on and talk through things, right? You know, I know Rob Walling and some of the other folks from like Startups for the Rest of Us. And so, and MicroConf. And so just kind of pull some of that together and say, okay, if you're building a software as a service, right, what do you have to do? And whether it's, you know, kind of a broad use category king kind of app, you know, so I'm trying to create a new category with my app, or whether it's, hey, you know, there are a few others out here that do the same kind of thing. And so I'm going to create a software as a service that plays in that space, and it's going to be a smaller micro SaaS. Right. I'm going to put that together. So that's going to be single player SaaS, SaaS. And so keep an eye out for that as well. Just to kind of provide a lot of that. Hey, here's how you build and market it while you're small. And then I do plan on getting into a little bit of, and here's where maybe you want to grow beyond a single developer or a small team. And here's maybe when you don't want to. So anyway, those are my picks. Hopefully you all enjoy that. And then just a quick reminder again, you know, just be kind to each other and just try and understand where people are coming from. It's been my experience that even the people who are kind of supporting the scary, weird, or frustrating things, they have reasons, right? And so I can at least try and understand those, even if I can't get behind them. So anyway, until next time, Max out.